there's something about this dude that's different. They can sense the Spirit of God in his life. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne, I will be greater than you. And he said to Pharaoh, see, I have set you over all of the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand. He put it in Joseph's hand and clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain on his neck and made him ride in a second chariot. And they called out before him, bow the knee. Thus he set him over all of the land of Egypt. He makes him the grand vizier, which is like the prime minister of all of Egypt. So Joseph is in charge of everything, over everything, except for Pharaoh himself. So it's like Potiphar's house, except now it's the whole country of Egypt. And Joseph is in charge. Now, that's important because in chapter 42, what we see is that the 7 years of plenty have gone, famine has come. Back in Israel, where Joseph's brothers are, they're hungry. They're starving. They need food. And so Joseph's father Jacob says, I want you guys to load up, I want you to go to Egypt, and I want you to get some food. And so in chapter 42, we see that Joseph's brothers go to Egypt. It's been 20 years since they saw their brother. Okay? A lot has changed. They don't recognize him. So they get there, and we see that they get there, they come in. Joseph realizes it's them, but they don't recognize him. And so Joseph begins to kind of mess with them a little bit. He sees his brothers, they recognize him, but they don't remember him. And he calls them spies. He's like, you guys are spies. You've come to take from us, like you're spies from Israel. And they kind of back up. They're like, no, we're good. We're not spies. We just came to get food. And so Joseph begins to ask him questions. He wants to know about his brothers, but he's trying to be discreet about it. And so they offer up. We're your servants. We're 12 brothers. The son of one is in the land of Canaan, and behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is no more. That's Joseph. But Joseph said to them, it is as I said to you, you are spies. By this you shall be tested, by the life of Pharaoh. You shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Right? He wants to see Benjamin because Benjamin is his only full brother. So Rachel had 2 sons. She had Joseph and she had Benjamin. Joseph wants Benjamin to be there, and he's not there. And so he wants them to bring Benjamin back. So he says, you can't come back here without Benjamin. I'm going to keep Simeon with me. You can go back to your father, and I'll give you Simeon when you bring Benjamin back. And so what happens? Well, the brothers go back. When they get back, they've paid money to get the food. When they get back, they're starting to unload their packs, and what they see is the money is put back in their packs. So they start freaking out. They're like, oh my gosh, we paid for this stuff, but it's in our packs. Joseph's going to think that we stole it. He's going to think that we're terrible people, so that they become scared. And they tell Jacob that he wants Benjamin to come back. And Jacob says, I've already lost my favorite son. Benjamin's the second favorite son. He's like, I'm not sending him. Simeon can stay in Egypt. We're going to just hang out here. So that's what happens. 42, they stay there. They don't go back. Chapter 43. Now the famine was severe in the land, and when they had eaten the grain that they bought from Egypt, their father said to them, go again, buy us a little grain. Right? So I need you to go back to Egypt. And then his brothers get in this dialogue again. We told you, Dad, he's not going to give us anything unless we take Benjamin. We got to take Benjamin with us, or he's not going to give us any grain. He thinks we're spies.
Here's what I found.
He thinks we're spies. Siri must have found the grain. He thinks we're spies. He's told us not to come back without our younger brother. He's going to kill Simeon if we go back and we don't take Benjamin with us. So they plead with him, and Judah finally makes this vow that he will take care of him. Okay, so Judah vows to keep him safe. So they go back, and they go back to Egypt. Okay, chapter 44. Joseph tests them again. Okay, so chapter 44, Joseph tests them again. They come back, and they're like, hey, when we got there, we had this money, but it wasn't ours. We gave it to you, and Joseph is cool about it. He's like, listen, God put the treasure in your sacks. It wasn't me. I know that it wasn't you. God was taking care of you. And so that's 43. And then 44, he tests them. He sees Benjamin at one point, and he has to leave because he breaks down. he gets so upset because he's seen his brother and that he's okay, and he breaks down. And then they have a feast together. They have a meal together, and Benjamin gets 5 times more than his brothers from the table. And that's in chapter 43. And then 44, Joseph tests his brothers. He sends them out again with the stuff. He fills their sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and each one the money in his sack. And then he takes one of his cups, and he puts it in Benjamin's bag to see what will happen. And so they leave, and as they leave, Joseph's men come up, and they said, one of you stole from me. Like, one of you took something from me. And they're like, no, none of us took anything, especially after the whole money deal, like, none of us took anything. And verse 12, it says, and he searched, beginning with the eldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they tore their clothes, and every man loaded his donkey, and they returned back to the city. They go back to Egypt. Now, when Judah and his brothers came, this is chapter 44, verse 14. I don't think I put this on the screen. So when Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, he was still there. They fell before him on the ground, and Joseph said to them, what deed is this that you have done? Do you not know that a man like me can indeed practice divination? Right? I'm smart. I can interpret dreams. This should have been a nod for them, right? They had a brother that could interpret them. They don't put 2 and 2 together. And Judah said, what shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how can we clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants. Both we and he also in whose hand the cup has been found. But he said, far be it from me that I should do so. Only the man whose hand the cup was found shall be my servant. But as for you, go up in peace to your father. In other words, I'm going to keep Benjamin. Y'all can go back to your father. And so Judah goes and he pleads. He's like, listen, I put a vow out to my dad that I would take care of Benjamin, that I would bring him back. You can't keep him. Like, it just won't work. And so they begin to plead and plead and plead. The boy cannot leave his father. Verse 22, for if he should leave his father would die. And then he said to your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again. And so he tells him to go back and buy a little food. Verse 30, now therefore, as soon as I come up to your servant my father, and the boy is not with us, then as his life is bound up in the boy's life, as soon as he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. And your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant, our father, with sorrow to Sheol. For your servant became a pledge of safety for the boy. Judah's talking about himself. For the boy to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father all my life. So Judah pleads with him, and finally Joseph just can't take it, right? The game is going on long enough. He's kind of not really tortured them, but he's testing them to see if they're better than they were before, right? And what he's seeing is that these are not the same men who threw me into the pit. These are not the same men who sold me into slavery. These are men who care for their brother. They came back for Simeon. They're caring for Benjamin. They've offered their life in replacement of his. So he finally realizes he can trust him. And then at the beginning of chapter 45, he breaks down. He could not control himself. And so he tells everybody to go away. Just get out. I got to rethink this. I got to think through it, right? And he breaks down. And then let's pick up in Genesis chapter 45, verse 4. Actually, go back to 3. Well, 4 is good. So Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me, please. And they came near, and he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. So the truth comes out. Joseph finally reveals himself to his brothers and says, listen, I'm Joseph, your brother. And he has humility here, right? He doesn't hold it against them. He says, listen, it really wasn't you who put me here. You might have sold me into slavery, but God meant for me to be here so that I could protect the promise that he made to our forefathers. Like, God put me here. Like, you might have sold me into slavery, but it was God who put me here. And so he tells his brothers, he tells them to go back to Israel, go get Jacob, go bring the whole family. We're going to come, and I want you to come and live in Egypt, right? Where you're taken care of. You don't have to go back and forth. You don't have to buy the grain. I want you to come here. Pharaoh finds out that Joseph's family's coming. He sets them up in the land of Goshen, which is like the nicest area in Egypt. Like it's the country club. It's got the greatest fruit. It's got the greatest vegetables. He puts them there and sets them up. Joseph's family is cared for. They're taken care of. And so Joseph has humility in the midst of all this power, right? He could get revenge on his brothers. He could wipe them out. He could take vengeance for what they had done to him, but he chooses to remain faithful to God because he sees that there's a bigger plan here. And it all kind of gets summed up in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. And you've probably heard this verse before. Joseph says to his brothers, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." Joseph had the presence of mind to go, listen, what you guys meant for evil, God used it for good. What you meant for evil, God used it for good. So what does all this mean for us? Well, what we see in the life of Joseph is that he is a man of trust. He is a man of integrity. He is a man of patience. And he is a man of humility. All the things that we as Christians should exercise in our daily life. We should be people who trust God, who are held to a higher standard. We're people of integrity. We are patient and trusting in God to work things out for us and for our good, and that we are humble even in the midst of power. We could do whatever we wanted to get our way. But all of us in this room face difficult circumstances, right? Anybody ever had a hard time? Anybody ever had difficult circumstances? At some point in your life, whether you haven't before, you will face difficult circumstances, and you can respond in one of two ways. Number one, you can let your circumstances define you. Oh, well, I'm in prison. I can't do nothing. Oh, well, I try to do the right thing, and all these bad things keep happening to me. You can let your circumstances define you, or you can let God define you despite your circumstances. And that's what Joseph does. Like, in spite of his circumstances, he still knows that God has a plan, that God is working something out, and he's trusting in him. So despite what everything looks like around him, he knows the bigger picture, that God is working out a bigger plan. I think it was Charles Spurgeon that said, it's like if you look at a tapestry, like a mosaic, right? If you get right up on it, like all you see is the threads right in front of your face, right? So there might be this one little red thread that's running through, and that's all you can see because it's right in front of your face. But what happens is when you step back and you can look at the thing as a whole, you see this beautiful picture, this beautiful tapestry that someone has woven together, because now all the pieces come together and it makes sense. We've got to trust that God is weaving together this beautiful tapestry, and even though all we can see is what's right in front of our face, we've got to trust that God is weaving together this beautiful, beautiful picture. And so what happened to Joseph in the pit? Well, when we only look at our present circumstances, we're forgetting the promises of God, right? God has promised that he will take care of us, that he is faithful to us, right? That he is going to watch out for us as his chosen people, that he will take care of us. What did Joseph do under pressure? Well, he remained and had fellowship with God, even despite being under pressure. He had faithfulness to God, even despite that he was under pressure. And he had fruit in his life that showed that he still trusted God. He didn't give in to temptation. He didn't give in to Potiphar's wife. When he was squeezed, his integrity and his character is what came out. And then Joseph had patience in the prison. You know what's crazy is that prison should be a place of bitterness and depression. Like, I've never been there, but I don't think it would be a fun place to go. Like, is anybody in here like, you know what, I really want to go to prison one day. I think that'd be great. But look at what God can do, even in prison. John Bunyan was in prison for 12 years, and out of that he wrote The Pilgrim's Progress. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German Christian who fought against the Nazis, was placed in prison, and he wrote an amazing book called The Cost of Discipleship. Martin Luther was put into prison for going against the Catholic Church, and while he was there, he translated the entire New Testament into German, into the common language, when at that point in time, it was only the priests who could read it in Latin. Paul wrote many of his letters from where? Prison. John was exiled to prison on Patmos, a deserted island, and he wrote the book of Revelation. So despite being in prison, God can use that to make things happen that are amazing if we would just have patience and trust in him. You see, the secret to victory in traumatic circumstances is to see with your eyes the hand of God in every circumstance. See, we look at the world and we go, God, why are these things happening to me? All we see are the problems instead of seeing them as, what is God doing right now? I know that God is faithful, and I know that he's going to use whatever circumstance I'm going through right now to do something amazing in my life down the road. We have to trust in the hand of God. Trust in God alone, because man will often let us down, as Joseph saw with Potiphar, with the cupbearer, that no matter how good he was to people, they often let him down, but God never did. And then I want to close you with this. In Romans 8:28, it says this. Paul writes, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. I don't know what your circumstances are. I don't know the things you've been through, but I do know this, that God is faithful. And if there's one thing that we can see in the life of Joseph, it's that when you trust God, God will change your circumstances and he will use them for your good. So we can trust in him to be faithful, to be good, because that's what he did for Joseph, and that's what he'll do for us. Would you pray with me? Father, we thank you that Joseph was a man of character, of integrity, that we have his story recorded in your word, that we can learn from it. God, I've never been to prison. I've never been thrown into a pit, but I've been through some rough circumstances. And God, there were oftentimes in the midst of that difficulty that I didn't trust you. And I'm sure there are people here in this room who have felt the same way. But God, over and over and over again, you have proven your faithfulness. You have proven that you will never leave us, that you will never forsake us. And like Paul said in Romans, God, that you are working all things together for our good. We just need to trust you. So I pray for everyone in this room, God, that you would help us to trust you in the midst of difficulty, in the midst of loss, in the midst of horrible circumstances, that we would trust you because you are faithful and you are for our good. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Thank you, guys. Y'all have a good night.